and welcome back to Navigating NIL. My name is Tyler Langford, and I'm excited to be joined today by the folks from over at ScoutSmart. We've got Erica and Diane here with us. Welcome on, guys.
Great to be here. Thanks for having us, Tyler.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So, Ecker Sports and ScoutSmart have been doing a lot of things together over the last, about year and a half or so. And I know that you guys have a lot of exciting things going on right now, and you've got some fun features that we want to talk about that we're adding to the repertoire. But before we get into all that, I'd love to just talk a little bit more about your guys' background. So, Diane, I'd love to start with you. I know that you're located out in Atlanta, but if you could give us, kind of your path to where you're at now with ScoutSmart, maybe where you went to school, how you got into this industry. A quick rundown of your path here.
Of course. Yes, grew up in Georgia, so I had to love football, right? You don't grow up in rural Georgia and not get immersed into Friday night lights. But went to the University of Georgia, go Dogs, national championship Bulldogs, I might mention, and majored in finance, and then worked for IBM for about a decade. Grew up in an entrepreneurial family, so I went out and started a business, left IBM, started my first business in the DC area, and it was acquired. And then I decided to start a business that had always been my dream, which would combine my love of data and technology with sports. And actually had the idea for ScoutSmart when I was doing my MBA at the U. Go Canes. And then it's been a journey. I mean, it's been interesting and challenging to really have the college coaches embrace some of the analytics, and we really had to listen to them and learn from them too, meet them where they are. But we're really excited about what's happening with ScoutSmart, and we know those coaches are facing even more complexity with things like NIL and transfer portal. So we're excited to support them.
Yeah, absolutely. So could you give us a little bit of a breakdown of, for those who don't know, what ScoutSmart is and what you guys are doing with analytics to help coaches and athletes?
Absolutely. So ScoutSmart is a predictive analytics platform, and we help those college coaches find recruits that fit their program. We know that, different schools are looking for different types of players, especially athletically. Also, we can sort by academic. We can sort by projected level of play. Is this a player that's going to play at the Power 5 level? Is this more of a D2, D3 player? But we have a broad range, more than 75,000 recruits in the database. We have junior college players and transfer portal players. So we can really help those coaches, build their roster and have data-driven discussions around who they want to recruit. We make it really easy for them to filter out the recruits that would not fit their program and then just focus in on those that would. So it's both efficient and it's effective, and that they might find some recruits they wouldn't normally have found by looking at our larger database.
Absolutely, yeah. And the resources that you guys provide are super valuable. And I know that, in adding to those resources constantly, that's probably how, Erica came to enter the mix. So, Erica, would you mind giving us a little bit of insight into your background, how you got to be working with ScoutSmart, maybe what your next steps are in life? I know you're going off to college soon. I'd love a quick rundown.
Yeah, sure. So, I recently graduated from Wheeler High School, and I was in the magnet program. And as one of the senior things that we're able to do is an internship off campus. So I reached out to Diane at ScoutSmart and asked if I could intern with her for the fall semester of my senior year, and she gladly said yes. So I joined their team, and I spent most of that fall semester researching NIL deals because she mentioned to me that it was something that they'd like to get more involved with since it was just recently legalized and there's not much to do with high school players yet. So I spent most of my time researching that. I actually wrote a research paper for it and everything like that. And part of that was actually designing an algorithm that predicts the likelihood of a high school player obtaining an NIL deal. So once the internship ended at the end of my fall semester, then Diane actually hired me for 3 year. So I've been working here since then as well. And I recently just finished programming the algorithm, so fun. And I plan on attending Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the fall.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, so we've got a rock star in our midst today, a couple of rock stars in our midst today, but obviously you're doing a lot of very impressive stuff, and we're going to dive into. I'm an analytics guy, so I'm excited to talk a little bit more specifically about, how you would go without giving up too much, obviously, about how you go about developing something like that and what the value that it brings is. But I'm also curious, Diane, having kind of been around the sports industry for a while, right, or having grown up loving it, obviously being a dog and a cane, you're going to be around that a lot. How has NIL changed the game for you? What are some things that have surprised you about the industry since NIL has come to fruition? What are some things that it's changed, I guess, for better or for worse?
Yeah, and I think there's some of both, right? I think it's good for the student athletes to be able to make some money off of their name, image, and likeness. They truly are the stars in college athletics. So I think it's a good thing. I think I was kind of surprised by the speed at which the it shifted from the college programs having so much control and influence to really the power of the student athlete. Again, not saying it's good or bad. I just was surprised by the quickness of the shift because things don't tend to move that fast. And I think that there does need to be transparency, some standardization in place for these NIL deals. I think we want to stay away, if we can, from bureaucracy. I don't think we want so many rules that we don't even know if we're following the rules or not. But I do think there needs to be some guidelines and parameters and standards. We've done a couple of NIL deals at ScoutSmart, and it's worked pretty well for us. But we've done our own contract. I would have been glad to have had a standard contract to use, knowing that I'm going to be, compliant for that school, for NCAA, whatever it may be. And I really think it's changing the way college coaches recruit too. I mean, it's something they have to consider. They're looking at their collectives. They're looking at, other players' NIL deals. It's another factor in the recruiting process.
No, it really is. And obviously, there's been not necessarily NIL, but there's always been some sort of money exchange to some degree, right? And now that it's above board, but it's not overly regulated, it's a whole different conversation in college sports. So for coaches to manage, a locker room now that finances are a part of things, I know that is complicated. I know that a lot has shifted. So one thing I'm curious about, and I know you've done a lot of research into the topic, Arabella, what are some trends that you've noticed in terms of NIL? What are some things that can impact an athlete's value? What are some things that athletes should be focusing on as they're trying to go out and get NIL deals?
Yeah, based on my research of like the players who tended to get the most deals in the past, it showed that social media presence was definitely like the highest factor. Mostly on like Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram currently, it would be the players who had like a high following and were able to get like endorsement deals from any type of company that wanted like branding from them or something like that. And then another one happened to be the position they played. We found that quarterbacks and wide receivers and running backs tended to get the most deals just because they're, some of the more important players on the field and the ones that like most the audience is like paying attention to. And then after that, I saw level of play, which was the level that they're playing in the college collegiate level. So Power Fives tended to get the most deals just because a lot of companies, if they're sponsoring one player from a Power Five, they end up just sponsoring the whole team. So regardless of what position you are, if you are on a Power Five team, you're likely to get a deal regardless. And then the last one I found was whether or not you had any current deals. In the high school level, if you already had a deal, then companies are already looking at you. And then also if you're in a state that even allows deals, because since this is just recently legalized, not every state is even allowing high school players to get NIL deals. So yeah, that ended up being a big factor as well.
Absolutely. And one thing that I'm curious about is I know that, for football, if you're a Power Five and you play quarterback, right, your value is going to be exponentially larger than, a Division III player or someone who plays a different sport, right? So do you think that the positional value and the value of the level that you're at, do you think that applies throughout most college sports, or do you think that's something that's unique to football? And I know that's a kind of a complex question, but I also know that you guys do a lot. And I know you guys focus mostly on football, but I'm just curious if you think that's something that would apply throughout the industry.
Yeah, I think football is a little more special just because there are so many players on the field. But when I was seeing for like basketball, it's not really like that just because there's only like five players on the court for each side. So I don't know, everyone is kind of like paid attention to, I guess. But definitely like for basketball still is like the point guard would still get like um the most deals. So I guess that's like a little comparable. But I think for football it's definitely a more yeah, that way.
No, big time. And obviously you see that with the revenue generated. And I think, where I'm kind of going with that is, unless you are in the certain echelon of position and division and sport, you have to do certain things to, be successful in NIL. And I think that you guys at ScoutSmart emphasizing the importance of building your brand, right, and building up, not just your athletic profile, but also how you represent yourself, that's really important. One thing I'm really curious about, Diane, and this is obviously a big topic in the news right now, conference realignment, right? There are a ton of movers and shakers right now. We all know it's going to change the landscape of college football. It already has. We don't necessarily know where it's going, but I know it's going to impact recruiting. And I know that I'm sure you have had to kind of think about, how this might impact you guys. What are your thoughts on how conference realignment might impact recruiting?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think we're still going to see how it plays out on the West Coast, right? Pac-12 and the ACC. Um, I it does impact recruiting, and it impacts the student athletes as well, especially when you think about traveling across the country, for a game. You're still a student as well. But I think in the recruiting, it's going to affect more the Power Five schools, right? They're the ones that really are doing this realignment. I think it opens up the recruiting to be a little more national, to be honest with you. Most Power Fives, while they say they recruit nationally, they tend to find more recruits closer to home. Georgia is certainly that
Hmm.
way. I think you would see a good percentage of the roster are residents of Georgia, maybe a few out of Florida or somewhere else, but it's still pretty close to home. But I think it kind of opens up the recruiting to be a little more national. And I also wonder if the Power Five is actually just going to split off at some point and really be its own entity for football and maybe basketball. I don't know, but definitely for football. So that would certainly change recruiting if that's the case as well. We'd be looking at something different. A lot of our coaches are the non-Power Five coaches, so I don't think they see quite as much impact with this. Although we're starting to see some shifting of some of those schools moving up too, right? So they're going to have to up their recruiting. I think an example of when recently James Madison University. I know we spoke with
Hmm.
some of their folks in recruiting, and they're in a different world now.
Yeah.
In terms of making sure they're recruiting the athletes to be competitive.
Now, that's really interesting, and it's a really interesting issue. And there's obviously a lot to take into consideration, whether it's, and I mean, people don't necessarily understand, it comes down to everything from like what level of research grant your university can get to, the TV deals and streaming services have entered the sports realm when it comes to TV deals. So things have really gotten convoluted. So that's an interesting point. And I think, I've heard some people say they think there may be more parity throughout the high levels of D1 because now you can play SEC football and not necessarily be an SEC country. You can play ACC football from the West Coast. So you bring up an interesting point. I guess one thing we've seen recently with group of five schools and in basketball as well, you see this, is people transferring up, right? Do you think that with conference realignment and like you said, the possibility of a split, people are going to have to change how they recruit? Because it seems to me that a lot of coaches at smaller schools are almost pitching it as if you come here and you do well for 2 years, who knows where you can go?
Yeah, I do think that the transfer portal plays a role there too, almost a feeder system, if you will, right? And we recently did an NIL deal with a player who is at a group of five school. He went from FCS school to a group of five school.
Oh, okay.
And yeah. And he's helping us come up with some things that we want to make sure we're including on our transfer portal players profile. For example, the coaches want to know kind of the strength of schedule if they played at the FCS level. What was their strength of schedule? Did they play a couple of teams that could show that they know how to play up a level or up two levels, right? So I think you're right. I think it has changed. I think my only concern about this is then we see less high school players getting recruited by some of these bigger programs, or programs at a higher level because they're getting more of their experienced players, through the transfer portal.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. Yeah, and so how have you guys approached then the transfer portal, right? And messaging that with coaches. I know you just mentioned a little bit about the strength of schedule, and that makes a ton of sense, but I never would have thought about that. So what's the process been like for you guys, adjusting to this kind of new era of sports?
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, it's taken a minute because one, we've got to have a process to make sure we're keeping it up to date, right? There's a lot of in and out, especially, when it opens in late November, early December, when we start to see that huge number. So we're already preparing for that right now to make sure we can handle that large group that comes in. And then the other thing is, making sure that we have all the information that the coaches need. I think everything that we can get on that player, we're trying to add to their profile. And we're looking at a couple of advanced stats that we can get because they're players at the collegiate level. With the high school players, we do some interesting things like a disruptor score, which is kind of an advanced analytic that says what percentage of plays did they disrupt the offense. But actually, we think we can do a little bit more with these guys that actually have college snaps, right, and some college stats. So we're looking at doing those, adding those as well.
Very cool. Yeah, you guys are on top of it. With so much going on and a lack of a real centralized database for coaches to really access that stuff, that's ridiculously valuable. And then finally, what we're really here to talk about, you guys are bringing in some really exciting new technology, obviously spearheaded by Araba and her research and her coding, which is awesome. And when we talked about this, last week or a couple weeks ago, I was blown away. I think this is fantastic. I think it's a really interesting concept, and I think it's something that we've seen other companies try, and I've had certain issues with it, and I think you guys do a really good job. So I don't want to introduce it for you. If you guys want to talk a little bit about your NIL Value Calculator, go for it.
Go ahead, Arba. You want to talk a little bit about it, and then I'll talk about how we plan to use it and market it.
Okay, yeah. So this is our NIL deal predictor algorithm. I'm not sure if that's the final name, but that's what we're calling it for now. And it essentially just predicts the likelihood of a high school football player obtaining an NIL deal during their college career. So it gives them a score of 1 through 9 based on the factors I mentioned earlier, which were their social media presence, their level of play, the state that they live in, because that just determines whether or not they are allowed to have any deals at the moment. And then, what's the last one? Oh, and then the position, sorry. So yeah, the algorithm first it looks at their level of play, because as I mentioned before, like a lot of Power 5 players are just going to automatically get a deal regardless. So that's going to give them like a high weights to start with. But then lower players like D2 players, then the other factors definitely are taken into a greater account because they're not necessarily all given deals. So the algorithm just takes all these different factors into account and sums up a total score out of 100, and then we take that out of 9 to just give them an NIL score. And basically from a score of 7 to 9 indicates like very high likelihood of obtaining a deal. A score of 4 to 7 or 6.9, I guess, indicates medium likelihood, and then anything less than 4 is not very likely. But all of these scores can be like increased based on the factors. So we're just trying to get some knowledge out there so that the players are able to see where they're currently at and then how they can improve their score.
That's awesome.
Exactly. And I think that's where the Ecker education comes into, Tyler. First we let these players know what's important, and then you guys kind of help them, school them up on how they can improve that likelihood if that's something that they want to pursue. So it's great. And I also just want to give a plug for Araba. She's amazing. I mean, who would have thought a high school student, a senior in high school, would be developing this algorithm? She's just done a great job. And I encourage, if anybody's out there that has a company, make sure you're using your college and high school interns. They really have a lot to bring to the table, and I think they're underutilized in corporate America. But given that we're in the space that we're in, definitely believe in using interns. But I'm very grateful for her. And then, we definitely think it helps the recruits kind of understand what they need to do if they do want to pursue NIL deals. And then we work with Ecker and can hand them off to Ecker to get the right education. But for the coaches, it gives them insights. We're looking for as many data points as we can get for the college coaches. It gives them some insights to, hey, this is a guy that's most likely going to get NIL deals, and we need to be thinking about that in our recruiting mindset as we recruit him, and let him know what kind of resources we have in our program to support him through his NIL journey. So that's very important as well. So it's an additional data point for the coaches. They'll also know if NIL was allowed in their state at high school level. Very easily on the profile, they'll show if it's prohibited or allowed, and if they have any existing deals. So, we believe in having really good, robust data available for those coaches that they need when they're recruiting.
Yeah, and I mentioned my affinity for analytics and things like that. And Araba, you're the first person who's been younger than me that we've had on the podcast, that we've worked with, and so that's super cool for me. And B, I didn't really have any understanding of any of the analytics side of things beyond just basic knowledge until I got to college. So you being able to sit down and walk myself and a couple other people through it at such a high level is amazing. So I'm curious just what your process when you had to sit, when you guys are talking about building something like this, what's your process? How do you sit down and start something like this? How do you build it out?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I started with the research last fall. So that took a lot of time of just like figuring out what the main factors were, because there's actually like a lot more out there, like GPA and stuff, but figuring out like which ones most impacted it was important. And then after that, figuring out how we could, program something that actually takes all of those into account, and then finding if it was data that we could actually obtain. So like for the social media one, as I mentioned, like there's TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. But currently, ScoutSmart is mainly focused on like the players' Twitter profiles. That's what we have for each of the players. So figuring out how to get Twitter data actually took most of the time for me. Figuring out how to use the Twitter API, because that was new for me. So we actually got some like help for that one. But yeah, just figuring out how to quantify all the different factors, I guess, was the most difficult part. But then programming it all together after that wasn't that hard, because we had designed it. I designed it for the research paper last semester. So once we figured out how to get the Twitter data, putting it all together wasn't so hard. And then it was just a bunch of trial and error. Once you finally got your code to run, then testing it and making sure that your tests are actually accurate, and going from there.
Totally. So where do you see it going from here? I know there's a million ways that we've already talked about that it can be useful. And I'm sure that you've already got some things in mind that you want to add to it. What are your thoughts on where it goes next?
Yes, we currently finally have something we can publish, I believe. So we're going to publish what we currently have onto the ScoutSmart profiles. But there's already several ways we can improve. I already have like a list of different things we could add to it. Like, as I mentioned, we're currently only focused on Twitter. So seeing if we can branch out and do Instagram and TikTok data. I know that's like a lot harder to acquire like easily. So we'll definitely have to look into that. But yeah, that and looking as I mentioned before, the GPA and stuff like that, like even though those are like less important factors, they're still important to some extent. So figuring out different ways that we can obtain that data and then add it would be the next steps, I guess.
Interesting. That's really cool. And then do you have any specific plans at MIT? Do you know what you're majoring in or what you want to go on and do in the future?
Yeah, I'm currently looking at studying computer science, but I might concentrate in artificial intelligence because that's something interesting to me recently. So I'll see. I'm not 100% sure on my major yet, but yeah.
AI is very cool. Yeah, AI is very interesting and is going to be super relevant going forward. That's awesome, Aruba. You're a name to remember. You're someone who's going to have a lot of success going forward, and that is super cool. So, yeah, I don't want to take up too much of your guys' time, but I really appreciate you guys for coming on and talking a little bit about what you guys have. I know at Ecker we're really excited. We've been doing a lot with you guys for a while, and this is just another incredible piece of value that you guys are bringing. So I'm very grateful for y'all for coming on and for being such fantastic partners for us.
Thanks, Tyler. We really value our relationship, our partnership with Ecker too. And thanks for having us on the podcast. This has been great.
Yeah, of course. We'll get you guys back on in a few months when there's some more to talk about.